One way to think about it is life is not a marathon, but a series of sprints and rests. Rather than keeping a constant pace or trying to live a balanced life, we need to have a rhythmic movement from Sabbath to sacrifice.
I've always tried to come up with work-life balance. I've always wondered if the problem with even trying to find balance doesn't make any sense. Is there a better way to look at this? That is certainly the genesis of this book that he wrote, Your Life in Rhythm. We did do an interview many years ago on this book with Bruce Miller, and it was so significant in my life that I thought when he mentioned that we could do another interview, I thought I would like to pass on some of those great principles that are in this book. It is written by Dr. Bruce Miller. This individual's been on the program with us many times before. As a matter of fact, on our website, we do have a link so that you can get it when it came out in 2016. But I've got the original here, the autography, back to 2009. I can't even believe that was 15 years ago. And so Bruce Miller, of course, he leads a team of individuals at Christ Fellowship at McKinney, Texas. He is the senior pastor there. He's also the chairman of the board of the One Heart McKinney community-wide outreach. He is the author of 12 books. Recently, we talked with him about leading a church in the time of sexual questioning. This one, Your Life in Rhythm. He has taught systematic theology at Dallas Theological Seminary, founded and leads the Center for Church-Based Training. And Bruce, it is always great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Kerby. What a delight. Thank you for inviting me back, and honored to be here with you.
15 years ago. My, how time flies. I had no idea. And this, I think, goes all the way back to your sense of frustration when, I believe at the time you were teaching in New Zealand, and
That's
it
correct.
just sort of came to you, and people were so excited about that. Then, you know, it was more than just a momentary insight. It ended up being this book that you published originally with Tyndale, and 250 pages of great material. But tell us a little bit more about the genesis of this book.
Yeah, and you know, from long ago to today, the day you called me to do this interview, not long days ago, I got an email from a businessman saying, "Hey, I so like your book, Your Life in Rhythm." This is just a couple days ago. I've just given it to a very busy man at our gym, and I'm giving it to my stepson. And then you contacted me, and I thought, gosh, this is just my agent says this is an evergreen book. And it started back when I was doing a conference for pastors, church leaders in New Zealand, and people were saying, I'm so burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just overcome. I'm overwhelmed. My life's out of balance. And I was on a whiteboard in a conference room, and I drew a wave on the whiteboard. And I think we're in the Auckland Harbor. We're at the ocean. It just made sense. And we began talking about rhythm. And we talked about 20 topics that day. But that's what stuck. And the man who organized the whole thing, Roland Foreman, called me back and said, Bruce, that's the idea everyone's running with. You should write on this. And I began to research rhythm and realized God has embedded rhythm in the whole created order.
Let's, if we can, talk about what you discovered. You're a graduate of University of Texas, and that's your alma mater, one of the many. And they have actually done research in what's called chronobiology. And that makes some sense because whether you look at it from a scientific point of view, or in a minute we're going to look at it from a biblical point of view, we do have certain rhythms that are part of our culture, and we sometimes have disconnected from some of them, haven't we?
That's correct. And some of these are cultural, but many of them are biological. And so I realized actually even Eastern medicine, in some ways ahead of Western medicine, in the connection between time and a medicine. So you might have a medicine that your doctor says, take this in the morning or take this in the evening. And they've discovered there's even medicines that during this season of the year, one medicine or another works better. It's understanding how time and our bodies work together, the time of the day, time of the month, and time of the year. It's absolutely fascinating. And of course, all you have to do is put your hand on your chest and feel your heartbeat. You know your blood pressure. There are so many aspects, of course, and if you've experienced, like I have, and you have too, things like jet lag, or people who suffer with seasonal affective disorder. All these are related to rhythms of life.
Wow. You know, one of the things that I say so often about why I like Christian camps is when you take God's word and put it in God's world, there's a sense of certainly the fact that that really comes and hits individuals in significant ways. But it also gets us back to nature, because then, of course, we still sometimes allow people to bring their smartphones. But if they didn't, there is a sense in which when the sun goes down, you go to bed. And when the sun comes up, you get up. And, you actually have 6 days of work and a seventh day of rest. And when you're tied into nature, you understand those rhythms. And now we, of course, have 24/7 lifestyles, which I think get us out of rhythm, don't they?
I do, and it's really hurting us. And I think we all know that in the always-on constancy of our world. If you're involved in global business, you're working across all the time zones, so it's 24/7. And, of course, the Internet's on 24/7. It never turns off. And even years ago, electricity, once we had light, and like you say, then when the sun went down, we could turn the light on and stay up for hours. And it's impacted our health physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
I'm going to talk about the different kinds of time, but just before I get to the break, let me take on the one controversial issue. I know this because I've tried over the years to present your material. I have a keynote presentation and a PowerPoint presentation and all that. But the one place where I get some resistance is the idea of balance. And you actually say that balance is a burden. And you're not the only one that's been saying that. And in some respects, before we get into why we should have rhythm, I think we need to dismiss this idea of work-life balance. Can you help us out with that?
Yeah, sure. I always thought I was supposed to live a balanced life. I kind of thought it must be in the Bible. And then I realized that's not really true. And if you want to go outside the Bible, in Keith Hammons in the journal or magazine Fast Company wrote an article called Balance is Bunk. And he addresses it from outside the Bible. But even if you go in the Scripture, you try to find balance. It's not in the Bible. But some say, yeah, but it could be a concept, like the Trinity is not in the Bible, but it's a biblical concept. Well, who lived a balanced life? Did Moses? Did Paul? Did Jesus? Well, of course not. And so it's not even a biblical In fact, Jesus calls us to sacrifice, to take up your cross, to lose your life. That doesn't sound very balanced to me, but the Bible also calls us to Sabbath. And so it's the rhythm of sacrifice to Sabbath rather than a static concept of balance. Frankly, we balance numbers, equations. You balance a stereo, but life is always moving. Balance is like a photograph, and rhythm is like a video.
Yes. I love the lines you've got there. Balance is like prose, and a rhythm is like dance, and balance is static, and rhythm is dynamic, and balance is rigid, and rhythm is flexible. And so I'm moving through really the first 3 chapters fairly quickly, because we're going to focus most of our time on the 2 different kinds of time, kairos and chronos. Then we're going to go through, first of all, the rhythm strategies for kairos, then the rhythm strategies for chronos. And then we'll talk about how we put it all together and ultimately have a rhythm that sees things from eternity. So that's kind of how we're going to put this together. But first of all, let's recognize that there are actually 2 kinds of time. And Bruce, help us out with that, because those come from these Greek words. That's right. They're 2 Greek words, and they're somewhat synonymous in the New Testament, but not in more ancient Greek literature. Kairos, Kairos, is more of a quality of time, or the right time. When someone talks about the right time to invest money or the right time to propose marriage, you're talking about the kairos time. Chronos, like words chronometer or chronology, is related to measured time, like the hours or the months. And so we all experience the same chronos time, but all of us are in unique kairos times for our lives. And it does seem to me that, of course, when we talk about this, you can go back to the Greek gods. Kronos, was a man with his zodiac, and we talk about father time and things like that. But although these are Greek words, and a lot of them are rooted in Greek mythology, they also surface, I think, rather organically in the Scriptures, don't you think? Well, the Scripture says Christ came at the right time. And there's the word is kairos. He came at and the Scripture says we're also to seize or make the most of the time, or other translations will say the opportunity. It's the word kairos.
to make the most of the Kairos moment, to make the most of this unique time.
And again, some people have said that when we talk about quantity of time, chronos fits, and when we talk about quality of time, kairos. So those are the first two, and let's, if we can, then kind of work on the second part of your book, and that is the whole issue of kairos. And again, Kairos, rhythm strategies, because as you began to work your way through that, you found that there were personal seasons, there are life stages. Help us think through what that might mean. Go ahead.
I have found that people will ask, like, what's my life mission, or even my values, or take a personality test. But a question I find that's least asked is, what time is it in my life?
Mm-hmm.
What time is it in my life? And personal seasons are shorter. Like you might engagement or pregnancy or common seasons or moving to a new town. It takes about a year to get adjusted. A stage is longer. A stage might be a stage of being in the military for 4 to 10 years, or a stage of being a college student, or a stage of adolescence, a stage of raising children. These are longer periods of time, but in both, you might be in several seasons. You're usually in one stage. But it's important to identify, what stage am I in? And just very practically, I would encourage you to think, what was my previous stage? What stage am I currently in, and what's coming next? Because that helps you identify, this is the time that I'm in right now.
Well, and again, if you're talking about Scripture, Ecclesiastes 3,
That's
if you're
exactly
thinking
right.
about pop music, Pete Seeger, Turn, 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 later recorded again by the Byrds. So whether you have a musical background or a biblical understanding, these ideas of personal seasons, and of course this idea that in 28 different times the word time is used by Solomon, a time for everything, and a season, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot. It does seem to me that this concept of Kairos strategy is key. So let's, if we can, now work through at least 3 of your strategies. And one of those is to release expectations, because that's, again, knowing the stage that you're in and recognizing that in some cases you don't have to do everything all at once.
That's right. You release expectations for more peace, meaning expectations that don't fit this time. I'd say I see this with young couples having their first baby. And it's not uncommon for a husband or wife, a prospective mother or father, to say, that baby's not going to change my life. And it's well-intentioned, but it's foolish. Because actually, an infant should change your life. And if you've been working out 2 hours a day and a really rigorous workout at the gym, you might want to shift as a young mom to pushing the stroller around the lake or the park. It's realizing that I'm in a different season now. And so to release that, and sometimes in churches, I find a lot of guilt when, I'll stay at the new baby stage. Maybe you've been in multiple Bible studies and serving for hours in multiple intense ministries. But when you have a new baby, or frankly, a brand new marriage, that's a season to release expectations that you would serve or do the same level of Bible study even in that short season.
Well said. Of course, when you're in the valley of the diapers, as I call it, that's obviously changed things. But let's get on to your other strategy here. Seize opportunities, because there's a real opportunity, given that life stage you might find yourself in, to do something that maybe later you could not do.
That's right. And I think as a Christian, it sees opportunities for the gospel, sees opportunities for more fulfillment. And so I find some parents get really frustrated in the late elementary, middle school, early high school years, when before your child can drive, you are the taxi driver, and you're driving them to school and events and sports and everything. Look at it as an opportunity. That time in the car, if you resist everybody wearing headphones, you have opportunities for conversation. You have opportunities to listen in on conversations in the back seat. And it's actually an incredible opportunity in the taxi season as a parent to take advantage of.
And you again talk about firsts and goodnight kisses. And of course, you mentioned taxi time and all the rest. There are just so many opportunities. And if we're always just kind of looking ahead or just saying, I'm just going to try to endure this instead of enjoying the moment, we'll miss those. But let me take one more before we take a break. And that is, of course, we've talked about two of the Kairos strategies. The third sort of fits naturally, and that is anticipate what is next.
I think about that with your Valley of the Diaper illustration. They will learn how to do this. They will use the bathroom. But when you're in the middle of it, it feels like I'm going to be changing diapers forever. But when you anticipate what's next for more hope, so you release expectations for more peace, you seize opportunities for more fulfillment, and you anticipate what's next for more hope, this too will change. You won't stay in this season forever. It can feel like it's never ending, like you're in a tunnel and you can't see the light at the end. But there is light at the end. This is the classically the engagement that feels like it's going to last forever, but you are going to get married. The pregnancy in those late months feels like it's never going to end, but you are going to give birth. And that hope is really, it gives the strength to sustain today.
And again, these are some of the Kairos rhythm strategies. Come back from the break, we'll take about the Chronos rhythm strategies. But let's, if we can, talk about how people can use this book. First of all, you suggest that it would be good to go through this book with a group because there's accountability and encouragement and the rest. You also have a section on terms of living in time with those rhythms and even a life exercise. So in about a minute or so, talk about how you could use this book, because I think this is helpful individually, but it's even more helpful in terms of group study.
Yeah, I've seen groups do this, church groups, Bible studies, small groups, and just reading groups, like, to say, hey, we're going to do a book club. I think it's really good for couples to read this together because you're doing life together as a husband and wife. And I have found a number of people read it and say, oh, my spouse has got to read this. And I say, that's right. It's a great book to read together as a couple.
We've talked about the Kairos strategies. Now we'll talk about the Chronos strategies. But the first thing we need to do, Bruce, is to talk about the fact that you really have 5 cycles. Can you explain that?
That's right. When we talk about Chronos time, we're talking about measured, predictable time. And at one time I thought, who invented the day, the week, the month, the quarter, the year? I realized it wasn't a particular culture, the Chinese culture, Indian culture, someone else. These are embedded in the created order. They're determined by the way the sun and the moon and the earth interact, the rotation and orbit, except for the week. Interestingly, the week is established by God in creation and does not have a correlation. But the day is the rotation, the month is the lunar cycle, the quarter is the solstice, and the year is the orbit. And so when I think about, I think we need to shift our mindset from managing time. Of course, we talk a lot about time management, to flowing in time. Because honestly, we don't manage time. That's a bit arrogant. Only God does that. But we flow in time the way God created it.
Talk about the feasts for just a minute, because you have, of course, that embedded in the scriptures, and that is a very significant aspect as well, isn't it?
That's right. Amazingly, the Feast of Israel fit these cycles. There were daily sacrifices and weekly, of course, on the Sabbath, on Saturday, and then lunar, monthly, quarterly, and annual with the Day of Atonement. So really the Feast of Israel match up with the created cycles that all of us live in and should flow in.
And again, these are ones that, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, we are sort of disconnected from. The fact that all of us have traveled, and I know you've traveled overseas, and all of us have found ourselves sometimes waking up in the early morning going, okay, where am I? What day is it? All sorts of kinds of things. And there is a sense in which that's why I think getting back to nature is helpful, getting back to some of those basic rhythms. And there have been books written about biological clocks and the rhythms of life. So in some respects, you're not creating something, you're acknowledging something that's always been there. But in this fast-paced, frenetic lifestyle where the electric lights are always on, the internet is always available, most stores are open. I mean, some of us are old enough to remember when we had blue laws and some of the stores would close down. Of course, we don't have, Hobby Lobby or Chick-fil-A open on Sundays. But without those few exceptions, everything is 24/7, 365, and we really missed some things. And I think your book really brings us back to those. So let's talk about some of this.
I think getting more distant from nature, the created order, has really hurt us, like you say. And I think where it becomes obvious to us when we violate these cycles, these rhythms, is the day. It's the easiest one. Most of us, when we were younger, I imagine you did, I did, Kerby, stay up all night because we want to get more done. And then that didn't work very well. And few people have stayed up 2 nights in a row. And the reason you don't do that when you're older is you realize, actually, I don't get more done by staying up all night. It hurts me. And so we realize, no, good wisdom, and if you read the studies, is to get the same amount of sleep every night, to go to bed at about the same time, wake up about the same time, and get a consistent amount of sleep. That's respecting the rhythm of the day. What if the same thing happens on a week, about taking a day off, a week, a Sabbath, and the month, and the quarter, and the year? And there's actual research that people who don't take an annual vacation are at a higher risk for heart attack. You're violating the annual rhythm.
Let me also mention that you have an appendix where you can schedule your life events. And so you have some for your personal annual flow, then your personal yearly cycle, quarterly cycle, monthly cycle, weekly cycle, daily cycle. Just fascinating material. So again, I want people to know that you are obviously thinking through all the ways in which we can diagram this out and begin to implement some of this. But let's talk about a couple of the strategies. One is, of course, pace yourself. There are times in which there are things that need to be done in the day, sometimes in the week, sometimes in the month, sometimes in the year, whatever it might be. And so whether it's paying bills or annual cycles, there are all sorts of places where we really need to make sure that we pace ourselves.
That's right. It's about frequency. And it's also important to sync that up with important people in your life. So let me just ask you, if your parents are alive, how frequently do you call your mom? And whatever it is, you might think, how frequently does your mom want you to call her? And if she has a daily expectation and you have a monthly expectation, that's not going to work so well.
Yes. So again, just all sorts of ideas. And again, so many good diagrams and charts to help people begin to implement that. So one of those, of course, is pace yourself. I love this one, though, build rituals. If you think about that, a lot of the feasts are rituals. A lot of the church calendar are rituals. And those are obviously in very good illustrations of that. Sometimes a ritual can be a negative, but these rituals, these family rituals, these church calendars and other things are very, very important. And again, you talk about that in the book.
Yeah, and in other words, to help you access the word ritual might be on a shorter rhythm, like a day or a week, is think habit or a discipline. And on a longer rhythm, like a year, think tradition. Like maybe we have a tradition for New Year's Eve or birthdays or anniversary. The opportunity here, the strategy is you can build life-enhancing, mission-enhancing rituals that can reinforce your values and what you really want to be about by instilling habits, disciplines, traditions, all of which I embrace under the title rituals that can really enhance your life.
I did mention churches, and since you do have a section there about worship rituals, you have liturgical Christians, and we have many in the listening audience that have benefited from an annual set of rhythms built into the church year. You have lectionaries and other kinds of liturgical readings and things of that nature. And when people say, well, we don't need to always stick to those, I understand that, but there is a sense in which if you look at all the feasts that were in the Old Testament, it makes sense that we would have some of those in our churches in the New Testament.
That's right. And what you do repeatedly forms you. And so people talk about empty ritual, and they worry, well, if I celebrated the Lord's Supper every week, it'd be empty. Well, many people in churches that do celebrate the Lord's Supper weekly, liturgical churches, actually our church has adopted this as a low church, a non-liturgical church. It actually forms you because what you do repeatedly shapes your life.
Wow. So good. And again, I appreciate you saying that because I knew your church isn't necessarily a liturgical church, but there you're doing that. So one more strategy just before we take a break, and that is oscillate work and rest. And again, we're talking to high-octane, stressed individual, type A plus individual by the name of Bruce Miller. But there is a dealing with work and rest, and that's the other part of your strategy as well.
Yes, and I find that most people feel like they're working too hard and beat themselves up and say, I've got to take some time off. Then they go on a vacation and they beat themselves up and think, I've got to keep on track on email. So I'll wake up before the family and check email real fast. And so we don't really work hard enough when we should or rest well enough on the other time. So one way to think about it is life is not a marathon, but a series of sprints and rests. Rather than keeping a constant pace or trying to live a balanced life, we need to have a rhythmic movement from Sabbath to sacrifice, to working hard. Nothing wrong with working hard and having a time of intensity, but it needs to be followed by a time of rest and renewal.
Let's talk about that for just a minute, because you talk about by taking one day each week to rest. I actually got more done in the other 6 days than I was getting done in 7 days before. Now, I mentioned just a minute ago, we've had the Green family on here as well, and they have said by actually working 6 days and then leaving Sunday off at Hobby Lobby, we actually do better than many of our, quote, competitors that are open 7 days a week. It's a little bit like tithing. A lot of people say, if I give 10%, can I even live on the 90%? And I've heard a lot of people, including our family as well, I do better with the 90% than I would have if I had the 100%. And there's a sense in terms of this oscillating work and rest that works as well, doesn't it?
I think that's right. And part of that is an act of faith, that trusting God, which if you go all the way back to manna in the Old Testament, it only came 6 days. And on the sixth day, God provided enough for the seventh day. It's a fascinating story to go and read. But it's trusting God that actually he can do more with the 90% than you could with the 100. He can do more with 6 days than you could with 7. And then, if you need a little help for your faith, if you would go do research on this, you'll find that's actually the case in practical everyday life.
We've talked about Kairos, rhythm strategies, Chronos, rhythm strategies. Bruce, if you can, help us put it all together. And what I appreciate so much about your book is that, once again, you have a rhythm solution process, and then you give some samples, a college student, a new man, a new woman, a new man, a divorced individual, whatever they might be, and then one for yourself. So take us through how we can begin to take what we've already learned and what we can read in the previous pages of your book, which go on for about 190 pages. In the last pages, you spend some time helping us think about how to apply all of the things we've just learned. So how do we get started?
I want to make it really practical to really make a difference in your life, not just be a fun book to read, but make a difference, help you have a better life. So first you identify the problem. What is it I'm struggling with in my life that you might express in terms of being unbalanced? Then identify what time is it in my life. I'm raising little kids. I'm an empty nester. I've just retired, whatever it might be. And then once you've identified what time it is, your season and stages, you can apply the 3 strategies. Release expectations that don't fit this season, this time, for more peace. Seize opportunities for Christ for more fulfillment in this season. And then anticipate what's next in the next season. Then you want to review the 5 Chronos cycles, the way God made the world to function, the day, the week, the month, the quarter, and the year, and think, how do I flow in these well? Again, we don't manage time, we flow in time. Time is not like money, contrary to Benjamin Franklin. We can't save it or spend it or manage it. We flow in it. And there's 3 big ways to do that. Pace yourself, which is about frequency and flow. Build life-enhancing rituals in each of the 5 cycles, and then oscillate work and rest or intensity and renewal in each of the 5 cycles.
So again, what have you found as you've been able to apply this not only to your life, but to people in your church and other places where you've spoken? Because now you've got a decade and a half worth of experience that has come from a book that you've written.
I'll tell you, you've seen the research, Kerby. So many pastors are burnt out, exhausted, even quitting the ministry. And I almost feel embarrassed. I've been a senior pastor 27 years, been in official ministry 42 years, and I'm not burnt out. I'm not exhausted. I'm loving the ministry. And people say, what's your secret? Well, there's a lot about my walk with Christ, but a key of why I think I've been able to flourish in ministry all these years is by living in rhythm, which I've done for the last 15 years of applying these principles to my life, not perfectly, but for the most part. And I think it's enabled me to avoid a lot of the burnout that so many pastors experience.
Wow. Just in the few minutes we have left, you have a chapter on Seen from Eternity. And that's important, too, because there is a sense in which you begin to sort out what is meaningful and what is meaningless. The fact that we're made for immortality, we are going to live an eternal life, not just here, but in the future. And so there's a sense in which seeing that from an eternal perspective is really key as well, isn't it?
Yes, and there's a third Greek word. There's kairos, chronos, and aeon, which is eternity. And you quoted Solomon in Ecclesiastes 3, his famous poem. In that same chapter, he says God has set eternity in our hearts.
Right.
And so it's seeing from eternity that gives perspective to how we live today, what really matters in the various seasons and stages of a lifetime and in the cycles of the day, the week, the month, the quarter, and the year.
What about the how we would use the appendix? Because you have an enormous number of charts, and I've always appreciated that, because then people sometimes, as they get into this, say, oh, I hadn't thought about that. For example, you've got all sorts of rhythms, whether it's New Year's Day or Valentine's Day. You've got with school open house. You've got, of course, religious Lent, Palm Sunday, Pentecost. I mean, you can go through this long, long list. And in some respects, what you're doing is creating a chart and then giving some content so that when I have this blank chart, I go, okay, what do I put there? You, in many cases, give us some suggestions on what to put in the chart, and that's going to help us begin to come up with an actual plan, because you know that as much as we would like people to enjoy your book, what you really hope is for it to change people's lives and put them more in rhythm with God's direction in their lives.
That's right. So we want to make it super practical. So if you're a chart, graph kind of person, I've got those for you. If you're more of an intuitive person, you probably don't need those. But I've got samples and blank ones so that you can apply these to your own life for what you're doing now, and then questions for group discussion and personal reflection so you can use it in that way. And sometimes I've supercharged this with, I have a one-day workshop that I've done for churches and employees and businesses to basically summarize the entire book in a one-day workshop, in which we also fill out the worksheets and say, okay, now let's go ahead and do a one draft. Here's how we would apply this to my life right here, right now, all 6 strategies.
One of the things I love about that is those last 3 pages are the questions for group discussion, personal reflection. So this is plug and play. If you are a small group leader, a life group leader, your pastor, whatever, you have that available. But let's, if we can, talk about what is on your website. It is brucebmiller.com. And if somebody says, I really would like to maybe get together the deacons in my church, the elders in my church, my Sunday school class, my life group class, whatever it might be, maybe my business, to work their way through that, there's a way in which people could actually schedule you to come and teach and lead in some of these regards, can't they?
That's right. Be happy to do that.
So again, some great material. I might just mention you are, of course, a church leader consultant. And, of course, we might even mention a few of the other books there as well. Leading a Church in a Time of Sexual Questioning, of course, we've talked about. But you've had many other books as well. The Leadership Baton, which is a book that I would highly recommend to individuals. And then, of course, since we have so many times talked about apologetics on this program, in the past we've talked about your book, The 7 Big Questions, Searching for God, Truth, and Purpose, and a variety of others that are available. So go to the website and find that. And in addition to Your Life in Rhythm, of course, there's one called Your Church in Rhythm, The Forgotten Dimensions of Seasons and Cycles. There's a Bible study there about big God and so many other great resources. So as always, Bruce Miller, it is just great for you to join us, and appreciate the relationship you and I have had since you were, I guess, just a graduator from high school. So it's been great to know you, and it's been great to have you on the program. So thank you for joining us today, Your Own Point of View.
You're most welcome, Kerby. I thank God for you and the amazing ways God has used you and is using you, and so thankful for our long and continued friendship.
Well, again, just before we wind down for today, let me just mention a couple of things. Book is entitled Your Life in Rhythm: Less Stress, More Peace, Less Frustration, More Fulfillment, Less Discouragement, More Hope. And again, if you are finding yourself saying, I'm too busy, I'm really tired, I'm starting to burn out, I'm anxious, I'm really kind of overwhelmed, this may be something that could help you. If you've been struggling for some time, as we've talked about this idea, well, we need to have a balanced life. A lot of people say, well, is that even in the scriptures? I'm not sure that it is. Is rhythm in the scriptures? I've given you a couple of verses and a couple of other illustrations there as well. And so I do commend the book to you. And if you would like to know more, of course, we have all that information on our website at pointofview.net. We have information about Bruce, brucebmiller.com. There's a place for you to schedule him, maybe to come and speak or to hold a seminar. It's all available, of course, at our website at pointofview.net. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.